decolonize my mind, to decolonize my way of thinking. And for that, I have what I feel as the best teacher, the best guru, the best master for me, which is Sri Aurobindo. So, decolonizing Indian cultural studies with Sri Aurobindo. I can even frame it as my own journey, but I would rather just talk about it in a general, broad way so that many of us can relate with it. So, I thought what I will do is maybe you can just move on to the next slide, please. As Rita ji also mentioned in terms of my background, I have a very interdisciplinary background, which is, I think, divine's way of preparing me intellectually to be open to all these new fields of studies that I'm eventually getting interested in. So, from an educational perspective, there are many writings of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, and in one writing he speaks of 3 key principles of true teaching. And one of the principles is from near to far. Start from near, from where you are, and then go far. Makes so much perfect sense. We worry about Russia and Ukraine, and we can't even solve conflict within our own families, right? So start from near to far and build your intellectual capacity to address bigger situations. So taking that principle as my starting point, I thought, why not just take the title of my talk itself and break it into different words? What does decolonize mean? What does India mean? What does culture mean? And if we have time, we can also talk about study. I'll at least like to deconstruct 2 or 3 of these words. So why the word decolonize? What does this mean? So are we not free? All our textbooks tell us we got freedom in 1947. We got decolonized in 1947, right? So why are we talking about in 2024? And I'm not the only one. I actually remember very clearly the first time I came across this word, and I was sitting at an airport in the US, that I don't remember which airport it was, and I was reading a book by a woman of Australian origin, but not of the Australian that we think as, white Australian or Caucasian Australian, but somebody from the Aboriginal background. And she had written, that was my first introduction to this idea of decolonizing research. At that time, I was deep into research, teaching research methodology. So what does this theme, the word decolonizing, mean? Can anybody share some thoughts on that? And if you have heard this term, how many of you have heard this word, decolonizing? From the students? Professors, I know they would have. From the students, you have? You have? You were half raising your hand. Huh? Do you know what this means? Not post-colonial. I'm not talking about post-colonial because English literature people know that. Decolonial or decolonizing.
People are control other people's control.
Okay, so that's like a political control, or what kind of control? Political control. So in 1947, we became politically free. Are we free in our mind? Why are we not free? Because we are conditioned by what? By some ways of thinking, right? By some ways of looking at the world, right? So that means we are totally not free in our ways of thinking. We are not free in our way of looking at what life is, what's the meaning of life. Please take a seat. Please take your seat, sir. Yeah? So the idea of decolonizing means to start the process of unconditioning in your mind so that you can know what is the origin, what is the source of the way you begin to look at the world. the way you begin to see your life, your place in the world, the purpose of your life, and the purpose of everything that you are doing. Study, for example, your education. What is the purpose of your education? Why are you in college? Why are you in college? Anybody can tell me? Why are we here? Right? Why are you in college? Be very honest. There is no wrong answer here. Start from near to far. Start from ourselves. Sorry? To learn something. Are you sure?
Yes.
Not to get a degree? Let's be honest. Yes. Right? We are here also to get a degree. Why? To get a job. Right? To lead a good life. So we have made an assumption that once we have a degree, once we get a good job, we will have a good life. Right? This is an assumption that we have in our mind. The process of decolonizing would mean, maybe what if this assumption is not true? Can there be another definition of why am I here? You said in the first answer, in your first response, to learn something, right? So maybe that's a good aim of education, but how many times we keep that in mind and we forget the other more tangible aims, which is to get a degree, clear the exam, get a degree and then move on, right? But what if I were to tell you the very purpose of education is what in India we'd say, the education is that which helps you become completely liberated, completely free. If I put that statement as the goal of education, would you agree? Yes, no? Not yet, right? Because we haven't been told that. And this is the problem with when our minds get colonized. We forget that in our own culture, in our own tradition, we may have a very different understanding of the aim of education itself, right? We think education is supposed to make us giving, all these degrees and this and that. We can add all these initials to our names. But maybe our culture also tells us education is that which essentially makes you more humble. That's again a very opposite understanding of education, right? So the whole process, I don't want to go into philosophies of education, but the whole idea is this is the work of decolonizing. When we start thinking about what we are, whatever we are doing at this point in life, in a more Indian way. How would we do that? For that, we have to first understand what India means. How many of you can tell me what is the meaning of India? Or what does India mean to you? What does India mean to you? Country. India means country. Okay, anybody else? Okay. How many of you can recognize this place which I have put out as a picture very deliberately? This is also India. Let's see how many of us know India. Can anybody recognize what this place is? Ellora. Very good, very good. Where is Ellora? Where is Ellora? Which state? Maharashtra. Maharashtra, right in the middle of the country. And what is unique about this place? This particular temple? Actually, yeah, okay, tell me, since you know, what is unique about this? You don't know. Anybody else? Ellora is a set of caves. It's a, No, these are rock-cut cave temples. But this is actually not a temple, Kailasa temple. This is not actually a temple. We call it a temple because it is a temple. It's like you can walk into it. That's me standing there. So can you imagine how big that one stupa might be? But this is actually a sculpture because it was carved like a sculpture. So imagine there is one huge big rock, a mountain actually, and you are supposed to make a temple from it. not a sculpture. You are asked to make a temple, and you dug out, you start digging out pieces of rock from it, and you start from the top, not from the foundation. So this was sculpted from top to bottom. They say it took about 100 years to complete this, and it's a 2-story temple which actually is a piece of sculpture because it is made out of one rock, one mountain carved from top to bottom, right? This is just one of the thousands of examples of Indian genius out there. In our own neighborhood, we have the Brihadeshwara temple, Tanjavur, which around so many kilometers around, there was no place that that kind of stone was available. And yet they were able to build it 1,000 years ago, right? So to know India means to develop an appreciation for everything that is there in our land, right? Then it connects to culture also, because this is a living example of our culture. Can we move on to the next one? So let's start with India. Let's start with the word nation itself. Somebody said India means country. Fine. So country means a piece of land, right? Geography, from Himalayas to Kanyakumari and from east to west, kind of a thing, right? But that is what all the textbooks tell us, but that's just one very outer way of looking at our country. Sri Aurobindo speaks of country as mother, country as divine, country as a goddess, right? So when we start to think about our nation like that, we develop a different relation with her. And I'm deliberately saying her, it is not it. India is a she, India is a goddess. But Sri Aurobindo says all nations have some inherent goddess in them. It is for the people of that nation to discover the identity of that goddess. So when we start thinking like that, we develop a very new relation with our motherland, right? And in that process, the decolonizing process begins. It's not only my journey, it's the journey of many of us who have been drawn to Sri Aurobindo's work. So it's not a piece of earth, she's a power, she's a godhead, she's a divinity. And then he explains this in a very beautiful way by looking at a human body. When we look at ourselves, we only see the outer body, right? There is Gayatri, there is Rita, there are two separate outer bodies. There is me, there is Narendraji, there is Beenuji, and so on. This is what we ordinarily understand as the outer gross body. Sthul Sharira is the term in India. That sthul means very gross, very outer, very physical. Nation also has that body. Nation, the geography, from Kanyakumari to Himalayas and from wherever to wherever, right? Depending on how we want to define geography. That is the part of the outer body of a nation. But within all our outer bodies, there is some kind of a prana, life in us, right? Which makes us alive. Otherwise, we would be a piece of matter, right? So there is something that is alive in us, isn't it? We are living, right? So that is also part of the gross body, the outer body of the nation. And what is the life element in a nation? All of us. We, the people, right? We are there. That is the meaning of India in some sense, right? So that makes the outer body of a nation. The land, the geography, the rivers, the mountains, the nature, everything, plus the people who animate, who are living in that land. But is that all there is to India? We just saw one example, one out of thousands, many, many thousands. So then comes the second part, the subtle body of a nation. What is the subtle body in us? When we look at ourselves, what are subtle things that we don't see? We didn't know. We had been looking at him for at least, 1 hour. We didn't know what was hidden in him, something subtle, the inspiration that he was feeling, the writing that he was able to do impromptu, right? The thoughts that were coming up in his mind, the feelings that were stirring up in his heart as he was listening to Gayatri. All that is subtle. You don't see outside. When we saw Kritika, we didn't know she had this love for marigold, but it was there in her. It is part of her. So a nation also has that subtle body. What do you include in the subtle body? Her entire culture, her entire civilization, her entire thoughts, philosophies, creativity, everything that she has been able to produce. That is what makes the nation nation also. Right? Yes or no? Yes. Yeah? So it's not that India is a republic with whatever 50 states now or 49 and how many union territories with so many languages and dialects. That is just statistics. But everything, all the subtle creativity that is there is part of India. If we don't love that, we don't love India. This is very true. And then the story doesn't end there also. Underneath even this subtle body, I'm just taking you as an example, sir, please don't mind. He was the only one, while listening to Gayatri, he started, there were certain things were going on in him which came out as in this beautiful expression, right? All of us were listening. We probably were having different responses, different ways in which we were understanding what she was sharing. Why was it different? Because there is something even deeper which is unique to each one of us, which is called the temperament. That is what Sri Aurobindo speaks about as causal body, the cause. Why India was able to produce Ellora and Tanjavur and so many other things? Because there is something in India's temperament which could allow all this creativity to come. There is something in his temperament which allowed that expression to come, which is unique to him. Your college is famous for this beautiful garden, right? First time Gayatri and I came here, Dr. Das showed us around the beautiful gardens that are there and all that stuff. You go and look at any tree. Any of these trees, no two leaves are ever alike. Ever. Because nature does not like uniformity. This is true. Nature always experiments with infinite diversity. Same tree, no two leaves are ever alike. No two human beings are ever alike. Even though we are all Indians, we love our motherland, but there is something unique in each one of us, which is the cause of our creativity. Nation, it is true for nations also. No two nations are ever alike. We are all human family, we are all, love everyone and everything, that is all good. But don't bury our differences. Differences do not make us higher or lower, they just make us unique. So there is an Indian type. Young people like to talk about, when they are out hoping to make girlfriends and boyfriends, she's not my type, he's not my type. So there is something in them that makes them look for their type, even without being aware of what that is. So there is something called type, which has a truth in it. There is a national type also. There is an Indian cultural type, there is a Japanese type, there is an American type. It does not mean that all Americans will behave like that, or all Indians will behave like that. But there is something unique about that. Our job is to find that, because even underneath that uniqueness, there is some other thing which is actually just one. So behind American type, Japanese type, German type, Indian type, there is one source, single source, which expresses itself in all these different types. So you see, when I say this, we are actually, okay, let me give you another simple example. We are celebrating Onam, right? So Onam, most people know the story. the story behind Onam? There is something called 3 strides of Vishnu, right? 3 steps of Vishnu. Anybody who doesn't know the story? Anybody who does not know the story? Okay, then if you don't know, you should discover it, because that is part of discovering India, part of decolonizing project work. Anyway, so the story involves Vishnu coming to meet this king Bali, and he takes 3 steps, right? Now, everybody knows the story in a religious sort of way. And there is one simple statement of Sri Aurobindo. Why I say that he is my teacher in helping this decolonizing journey. He said at one casual, it's like one of aphorisms, it's not even a big book, he's written volumes of books. He talks about what is the meaning of these 3 steps of Vishnu. The first is the unity of the family, the first step. The second step is unity of the nation. And the third step is unity of humanity. Simple statement, but deep philosophy hidden in that. First, we have to be united in our own family, in our own community, smaller unity. Only when we accomplish that, we can worry about national unity. Only when we have accomplished that, we can worry about human unity. But what happens is, our, so many times our education and our politicians also, and our thought leaders, our social media influencers, all these people that we listen to, they tell us, you must have an opinion on Ukraine and Russia. You must have an opinion on Israel-Palestine, right? You must take sides. I don't know if people here are in both the colleges know, but if you look at bigger campuses in Delhi, Mumbai, many other places in the country as well as abroad, there are major debates going on university campuses about these world conflicts. While in their own homes, they might not be talking to their own parents on a very friendly terms. So, when we try to take a step beyond the immediate steps, we actually end up creating more problem, right? So these are different ways. To understand nation also, we have to start. Sometimes it is good to start from the outside, but always remember that outside is only one part of it, right? When you walk into an office, what is the first thing we often see? How clean it is, how well organized is it, And when that is there, we feel good. Okay, yahan kaam ho sakta hai. We can get our work done because there is comfortable chair, there is nice clean table and everything. That is true with the nation also. When we keep our outer nation clean, we start the inner process also of cleaning, right? So think of India in these 4 ways, 4 bodies: gross body, subtle body, causal body, and behind causal body, what is that one source which is common to all? Because that's where the world unity lies. But don't ignore the other 3. If you ignore your outer body, you won't be able to worry about Ukraine and Russia, right? So keep that in mind, keep this order in mind. We move on to the next one. So you see, when we start thinking like this, our own definition of nation begins to change. Another place he talks about, in Indian thought, we have never thought of nation as the final resting point. Beyond nation is humanity. Beyond humanity is entire existence. Why leave cats and dogs and all the other creatures outside? So all existence is part of one whole unity. This is what Indian thought teaches us. And if we are not taught this in our schools and colleges, it is a big disservice we are doing to ourselves and to our future generations. And I will be very honest in saying, in all my education, in some of the premium institutions in India, we were never taught to look at India in an Indian way. because all our curriculum has been from a colonial side. Whether it is the unity of India, the caste problem, all of that. We were never even told that the word caste has no basis in any Indian language. Even the word religion has no basis in any Indian language. But we think of it, the entire country is burnt just on these two words. Right? So we have to start asking this question, what is the origin of the word caste? Is this part of my Indian experience that I know? Where did it come from? What does the word religion mean? All these things. What is the equivalent word in my language, which may have something similar to what we today know as religion? All these questions are very difficult because they shake you from inside, right? That all my learning was useless. But that is the journey of decolonizing. Okay, move on to the next, please. So we come to then culture. Is it making sense what I'm sharing? Yeah? Okay, so culture. What does culture mean? What does culture mean? I was admiring Lily ma'am's sari, part of culture. I like my sari, part of culture. The moment she sat in the car, Gayatri, oh, this is a South Indian, South silk I bought in Kolkata, part of culture. But what else is culture? Is this all? We just had Jollu Bhara Sandesh and samosa. Is that all there is to culture? Anything else we are missing?
Robust framework on belief,
Yes.
way of thinking,
Yes.
and to our history,
Yes.
more and more multi-dimensions can come out with proportion, the depth of the mind.
Yes.
We can coin the definitions of the word culture.
True, absolutely true. Anything from the students? What if I tell you that there is no word which actually can be translated as culture in India, in Indian language? I'm sorry, I don't know too much. I just know maybe 5-7 words in Tamil, but I don't know what is the word that comes closest in Tamil. But in Sanskrit, there is a word called Sanskriti, which is often Kalachar. And Kalacharam, right? Kalacharam is heritage. Okay. So Kalacharam, but very interesting how this word is, because that actually also does not mean culture from Sri Aurobindo's perspective. I'll come to that. But let me, since I know the word Samskriti a little bit better, let me deconstruct that. So Samskriti, this is a word in English, in Sanskrit, Hindi, many other Sanskrit-inspired languages in India. I think Marathi also has that Samskriti or something. Anyway, what then? Samskar. Samskaram is a word in Tamil also, no? The rituals, the
Samskriti is culture. Samskaram is the practices that
of the culture.
under culture.
Yes, so all these have the same root. Even the word Sanskrit has the same root. The root is sam and krit. There are two roots. Sam means, what does sam mean? S-U-M in English. You've all studied maths to some grade. What does sum mean? S-U-M. In English, add, right? So when you add, you do totaling, right? You bring things together. So sum actually in that sense means everything together, totality of everything, right? Do your sums means bring everything together. So sum means total, everything complete. And krit means something that has been created, something that has been inspiredly created, inspired and created. So the one that has been created to perfection, to completeness, is culture. When we say a person is cultured, that means he or she has been created to his or her potential perfection. Imagine when we start looking at culture that way, what is inherent in us intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, if I am able to express all that to its perfection. Everything that I'm capable of knowing, capable of expressing, whether it is poetry or mathematical equations, solving mathematical equations, or creating amazing coding work, or doing this amazing, I don't know, sociological theories, whatever it is, then the expressions can be many. But when we are able to do it to its perfection, we have arrived at a certain degree of culturedness. So Sri Aurobindo speaks about culture in that respect, that it's an expression of consciousness of life which expresses itself, which manifests, which comes out in three forms, in three aspects. And in the previous slide, I was talking about nation also in three ways: gross, subtle, and causal. So this time I'm going to start with the most inward, the causal, the very internal one. So just to kind of switch the order. And the three aspects are the way we understand our human experience. There is body, mind, and something other than mind, which ordinarily we call as soul. Is there anyone in the room who does not believe in soul? Anyone? Again, no wrong answers. But there is something, we don't know what soul is, but we think that there is something other than our mind, right? Because when I was 5 years old, I still had a different body and a different mind, but there was something that knew that there is this little 5-year-old out there, right? And now that I am not 5 anymore, there is still something in me that can detach and see, yeah, that there is this outer not 5-year-old anymore, right? So let's just call that as soul for now, since we don't know what soul is. Has anyone seen their soul? So we don't know, but we somehow believe, right? Okay, so there is a soul of a culture also. Okay, and interestingly, it is that invisible soul which has led everything that we see outside in India. And the mind and body have tried to play catch up. There are many examples, but for the lack of time, I will not go into that. Move on to the next one, because I want to talk about the soul a little bit. What is the soul of a culture? And Sri Aurobindo is very compassionate for us. He knows how non-smart we are, so he breaks down things for us. He has given us 4 words to understand the soul of a culture. And this, by the way, is true for any culture. You can study any culture using this parameters. The thought of a culture, ideal, upward will, soul's aspiration. And what is very interesting is, you can actually even use this as a matchmaking criteria when you are looking for a potential life partner. I am telling you this. What is the thought process of the person? What is the ideal that the person believes in? What is the upward will of the person? And what is the soul's aspiration of the person? So a minute ago I asked, is there anyone who does not believe in soul? Nobody raised their hand. Let me get more controversial. Is there anyone who does not believe in God? You don't believe in God? Okay, okay. No problem. But do you believe that there is some energy, some intelligence, some wisdom, some power, which is the source of all that we see and all that we are? Something is there, right? Some call it X, Y, Z, right? That is a thought, right? Ideal is a step higher. You know, all the study that I have done, let's say you have studied some scriptures, that's because you have to now take one step to convert your thought into an ideal. Everything that I have read, everything that my parents or grandparents have told me, it seems there is truth in that. So I'm going to hold on to that as my ideal in life. that there is some divine intelligence. I have a feeling that there may be, but since I have been given this ideal, I am going to hold on to that ideal. That is one step improvement, right? So you hold on to that and you say, I will arrange my life so that I can live up to that ideal. You can apply this in any situation. For example, if you are interested in doing good for the country, doing good for society, initially there is a thought, "Arey, what the heck am I doing with my life? Let me do something nice for the world, for the society, for my own village, for my own city," right? So that's a thought. Then you convert it into an ideal, that I must do something, right? So far, so good. But ideals are not going to take us anywhere. We also have to put it into action. And that's where will comes in, willpower, upward will to do better and better. If there is divine intelligence, if there is divine wisdom, how badly do I want to know that? That's the upward will. If I want to do good for the society, how much effort I'm going to put in to convert into action, to actually do it. That is upward will. And finally is the soul's aspiration. Do I really, that X invisible element in it, is it going to be only satisfied when it actually does it and accomplishes it? When we start to use this as a criteria, this is how we begin to understand the soul of a culture. What are the people's thoughts, highest thoughts? What are the ideals they are trying to live with? Towards what they put their highest effort, upward will, and what is their inmost aspiration. So in 1905, Sri Aurobindo wrote a letter to his wife. Yeah, and he talked about that you have married a mad person. He wrote it in Bengali. Madness, the Bengali word is some other word. So, but it's got translated into English. And it was a personal letter, but it became public because Britishers possessed it. I mean, they took it as part of the evidence and they actually used it in the court that, look, he's a mad person. So, because he was calling himself a mad, he said, I have 3 madnesses. And one of his madness was this: if there is a God, if he was like you, he didn't believe. Good, Indians are not believers. Indians ask questions. This is part of our temperament. We must ask questions. We must never believe whatever parents or teachers tell us. Actually true. I'm sorry with all the teachers around, but that's the point. That's the whole point of decolonizing, because we have accepted everything without questioning. Okay, so if there is God, I want to see Him. I want to meet Him. I want to know Him. He said, this is one of my madnesses. Imagine this. That is soul's aspiration. That's not a thought, not just even an ideal, not an upward will. That is the soul's deepest desire, right? That's how you identify the soul of a culture. Can we move on to next, please? Then, I don't want to leave the soul hanging. Soul has to express itself out. Soul expresses in mind and body. And in the mind, again, Sri Aurobindo speaks of 4 different things. How do we know what is the mind of a culture? By the way, again, I'm reminding, apply this to yourself individually. Everything will make sense. What is the mind of a culture? The creative self-expression. Whether it is the temples, whether it is the sculptures, paintings, art, music, dance, poetry, whatever, sciences, in various ways that it has creatively expressed itself. Appreciative aesthesis. All these great people made all these temples and architects and everything around. But what if majority of us who are not capable to do that, but we don't even have ability to appreciate it? We don't understand what is the value of that. That is living like animal, right? And this is exactly, there is one Subhashitam, it's called, one like a verse in one of the texts which says, someone who does not have an appreciation of music, art, culture, poetry, all these things is no worse than an animal. And then this is written by Bhartrihari, one of the great kings. He said, in the verse says, the only good thing is they are animals without tail. And another good thing is they don't eat grass, because if they were also eating grass, there would be nothing left for the actual animals, right? But the point is, it's living like an animal. If we don't develop this appreciation of all the beauty, all the creativity around us, then there has to be intelligence. We should not only look at just what we have seen in a very unobservant or unquestioning way, but have intelligence to appreciate it. It's the intelligence which led us to which led us to come up with a word called Bhugol. Long time back, much before the West knew that Earth is round, we knew. How did we know? The oldest surgical instruments in the world, which were developed in India, had all beaks. Their shapes were similar to the various beaks of the birds. How did they know? Were they able to do that? Through intelligence, right? The astronomical knowledge that we had. And then there is imagination, whether it is poetry, whether it is stories, whether it is, beautiful dreams that we all do. That is part of the mind of the culture. So all of this art, poetry, literature, science. And finally is the outer body. How do we organize our outer lives? The practical, the sociological, the economic structures, the political. So since we did not have this thing called caste, we had something called varna, we had something called jati, we had something called shreni, we had something called, I'm forgetting the Indian word for it, something which is similar to guilds, the apprenticeship models. Everything that we did to organize our outer life and everything that we continue to do today, all that is the outer body of a culture, right? So if you start looking at culture in this way, your mind begins to really broaden and expand. Can we move on to the next one? So what we need to remember is that at the base of all this great creativity that we've had in our culture are three main motives, three main inspiration, which have this key characteristic. They are spiritual, intuitive, and psychic. There are three different words. We usually think of spirituality all as one. But spiritual is something beyond the planes of our body, mind, higher realms. Intuitive, that is an inspiration that comes from above. And psychic is deep inside the heart. Because in India, we have been very, our ancestors have been very clear what is true within, or the truth within is also the truth outside. Or what is in the microcosm in us is also outside. There is no separation at some deep, higher spiritual level. But at the level in which we operate, we see separation. And that's the beauty of it, but that's also the challenge of it, right? But at the base is spiritual, intuitive, and psychic. So he felt some stirring within, and that psychic expression came out. Gayatri felt some intuitive and psychic stirring within, and hence the idea of bringing all these writers together to create that home anthology during COVID time, when there was such a dry slogan out there, stay home, stay safe. But from that, creative, through the intuitive and psychic inspiration, something creative came up, right? So at the base of all this is these three things. But this does not mean that we have neglected outside. Never believe anyone who says India was only good in spirituality. No, which is again a colonial thing that has been imposed on us. India had great leaders, great kings, great queens, great social structures, great political structures, great political empires. We knew how to conquer the world within and conquer the world outside. We knew that, but we didn't have to kill unnecessarily. Our aim was mostly to conquer the world through culture, which is why to this day, there is unknowingly people say India will be Jagat Guru, India will be spiritual guru of the world. Because this idea has been there implanted in humanity. When Alexander came, he did not just come to conquer the land, he also knew that there is something more to this land, right? So the idea that we are destined to be gurus of the world is deep planted in human imagination, human intelligence. When that happens, we'll see. Maybe not our lifetimes, but it will happen, right? Can we move on to the next? Yes.
Just tell a little bit about this.
Yes. So I don't know if anybody knows what this place is.
This is in Gujarat.
Yes, this is in Gujarat. No, this is actually Adalaj. This is a step well. So see, we didn't only build great temples. This is a step well which is a very beautiful water tank, right? And in fact, I wrote a little blog, something when I travel across the road and in my own home, those ugly black water tanks, or pink or yellow now. And then this is what our ancestors did. They stored water in tanks like this. This is just outside of Ahmedabad. Rani Ki Vav is even much more elaborate than that. Can you just go to the previous slide? I forgot to. So no, the one previous one. This is Rani Ki Vav. This is one panel of Rani Ki Vav. This is also in Gujarat. This is called, Rani is queen, Vav is the word for step well. So India had a great, amazing hydro engineering knowledge. So step wells were just one part of it. So this structure, Rani Ki Vav, is an inverted temple. It is built in the opposite way. So the shikhar, the top of the temple is down, and then on the top is, this thing. That's why it got preserved. It didn't got destroyed much. So it's just one small panel. And by the way, this is in a village called Patan in Gujarat. And on many of these sculptures, you will see beautiful borders sculpted, and few hundred meters or maybe few kilometers from this Rani Ki Vav are a very small group of weavers left who actually weave Patan Patola saris. Many of the women may know. These are saris that start from minimum, I think, 2 to 3 lakhs, because even a small handkerchief takes about 1 month to weave. And there is no reverse and back. I mean, it is so beautiful, so fine silk. The designs, you can find that in the same structure. So the continuity, that's another aspect of Indian culture. Like I said, this could be a lifetime of study. Continuity is another part. Same thing that was there 2000 years ago or 1500 years ago when this structure was built. The weavers are still using the same pattern to weave saris. So yeah. Okay, we can move on. So yes, so now that we know all this, we cannot be satisfied by knowing that, we were so good. Let's just pat ourselves and say we are, descendants of this great culture. That's not going to do it. We ourselves have to be part of the work for a rebirth of this great country and this great culture. So that is why Sri Aurobindo's main work on Indian culture is titled The Renaissance in India. And that's the journal that we work with. The Renaissance, the rebirth, the rejuvenation. So what is it that we can do to be part of this India's rebirth? There are many things. But one thing that I've picked out today, I'm just going to read out the whole thing because it connects with all the youth and young at heart, all of us. Our first necessity, Sri Aurobindo says, if India is to survive and do her, because it's a goddess, her appointed work in the world, gods have works, goddesses have works, India has work to be the spiritual leader of the world, is that the youth of India should learn to think on all subjects, to think independently, fruitfully, going to the heart of things, not stopped by their surface. Think, think, and think. The moment we stop thinking, the moment we stop questioning, others will tell us what it means to be not just them, what it means to be you. And that is very dangerous. And we have allowed that to happen for last several centuries. Even after independence, I am sorry to say, we have left our educational system, our curriculum completely colonized. So, not to deny that there have been great poets who have written, Indian writing in English, but much before Ezekiel came to be known as that, Sri Aurobindo was writing thousands of poems in English. But Sri Aurobindo's name as Indian writer in English appears in very few universities around the world. His first poem in English was written at the age of 11, which was a copy, he said, of, inspired by Shelley. Still, the point is that he'd been writing poetry in English since 83, I think. So it was called The Light. Light, just light, not the light, light. So the point is, think, ask questions, and think originally, think independently. Can we move on to the next, and then I'll close, please? So now that we know all this, what do we have to do to bring back and manifest, express India's soul? Try to get in touch with our own soul. Try to work this exercise. What is my highest thought? What is my ideal? What is my upward will? What is my deep-seated soul's aspiration? The more you get in touch with your truth within, the more you will experience and feel for yourself the truth of your country. This is exactly the key Sri Aurobindo has given everyone who has come close to their writings. So instead of doing this great social work outside, first try to get in touch with your truth within. And Mother is, Mother, who was the spiritual collaborator, she was not born in India. She did not have an Indian body, but she had an Indian soul. She talked about what is the best way to serve and to work towards India. She said, overgrow your small egoistic personality and become a worthy child of our Mother India. Fulfill your duties with honesty and rectitude, and always keep cheerful and confident with a steady trust in the divine's grace. If we can do even that, that will be progress. Constant cheerfulness, constant honesty, sincerity, and overcoming of our egoistic personality. That's how you begin the process of coming closer to your truth within. Sounds very big, sounds, very big challenge, but we have to start from the first step. Take the first step. You're a student. Look how sincerely you're studying, how sincerely you are understanding the role of education. Degree is important, job is important, good life is important, but is there something more my learning can give me? Right? If my curriculum is not giving me, maybe I go beyond the curriculum. Maybe I find, instead of wasting time, I don't know, I spend time on social media also. Instead of spending way too much time on social media, maybe I can spend half an hour reading something outside the curriculum, right? So that might be a way to start. So take small steps, start your decolonizing journey. Don't worry, in India we believe in continuity, so we have many lifetimes. But we must start, right? Okay, so with that I want to close. I mean, there is a lot more, but I don't want to go into all that. But if there's any question, quick comment or question, please feel free to ask.